Pretending not to care is one of the most misunderstood forms of strength. Most people see it as coldness, detachment, or even arrogance. But in truth, it is often the last refuge of someone who once cared too much. To pretend not to care is not to stop feeling. It is to control the display of feeling. It is to protect the self from being consumed by the unpredictable storms of others. There comes a moment in every person's life when they realize that caring openly is not always rewarded with respect. It is sometimes met with manipulation, exploitation, or indifference. And so, the human mind evolves a defense. It learns to hide the flame while still feeling its heat. This act, though quiet, is profound. It is the moment when emotion meets discipline, when love meets logic, when heart learns to bow to mind. What people call indifference is sometimes a deep form of care that refuses to be wasted. You begin to see that by pretending not to care, you are not lying to others. You are protecting the truth of what you feel from those who have not earned access to it. The world teaches you this lesson the hard way. You give, they take. You listen, they talk. You open, they analyze. You love, they test. And in time you realize that caring too openly invites chaos. So you start building quiet walls, not made of cruelty, but of boundaries. Not of hate, but of self-respect. The more you pretend not to care, the more you regain control over your emotional reality. It is a discipline that separates the emotionally powerful from the emotionally impulsive. Some will misunderstand it. They will accuse you of being detached, cold, unfeeling. But what they cannot see is the invisible war that takes place within you every time you choose silence over reaction, restraint over expression, calm over chaos. Pretending not to care is the art of caring strategically. It is the realization that not every emotion deserves an audience. Not every wound deserves to be seen. Not every thought deserves to be shared. When you stop offering explanations, you reclaim your mystery. When you stop proving that you care, you shift the balance of power. People feel it. They begin to wonder what you're thinking. They start to question what you feel. Your silence becomes a mirror that reflects their own insecurities back at them. This is the hidden strength of emotional control. By pretending not to care, you force others to feel the absence of your energy. And in that absence, they discover its value. It is human nature to underestimate what is always available and to crave what is withdrawn. So the act of withholding, when done consciously, becomes a psychological strategy. But to master it, you must understand the difference between repression and control. Repression is fear-based. It hides emotion out of weakness. Control is strength-based. It chooses when and how to reveal emotion out of power. Pretending not to care is not about burying what you feel. It's about deciding who deserves to see it. It's about emotional governance. A king does not show his every thought to the court. He calculates the effect of each word, each gesture. The same applies to those who understand power in human relationships. When you master this art, you move differently. You no longer chase validation. You no longer explain misunderstandings. You no longer react to every provocation. You learn the subtle beauty of silence, the way it unnerves the impulsive, the way it commands attention without effort, the way it communicates without words. Pretending not to care does not mean being emotionless. It means being emotionally precise. It means knowing that your energy is currency and not everyone deserves to spend it. This precision separates those who live by impulse from those who live by intention. Most people exhaust themselves trying to prove they care, thinking that love, loyalty, and attention must always be demonstrated. But in truth, the most powerful forms of care are often invisible. They are found in patience, restraint, understanding, and detachment. When you care silently, you are not withdrawing love. You are refining it. You are transforming it from something reactive into something stable. The people who once doubted your care begin to feel its weight, not through words, but through the absence of your attention. The absence itself becomes the message. In the language of power, silence speaks louder than reassurance. The emotionally intelligent understand this instinctively. They know that not reacting is often the strongest response, because every time you react, you hand over control. You let others dictate your emotional state. Pretending not to care reclaims that control. It turns your silence into armor. It teaches you to observe rather than react, to analyze rather than assume, to decide rather than be driven. You become a strategist of your own heart. And this transformation does not happen overnight. It comes after many lessons, many disappointments, many betrayals that slowly teach you that caring without control is a form of self-destruction. You start to see patterns. The more you show, the less you are valued. The more you give, the less they appreciate. This realization doesn't make you bitter. It makes you wise. You begin to understand that people respect what they cannot fully read. They are drawn to what they cannot fully possess. And so, pretending not to care becomes not a deception, but a revelation of maturity. You begin to act with calm awareness rather than emotional reaction. You learn the strength of delayed expression, the power of letting people wonder. This control over your emotional presentation becomes your quiet influence. Others may not know what you're thinking, but they feel your presence. They feel that you are not easily moved. That feeling creates respect, sometimes fear, sometimes admiration, always curiosity. The truth is, pretending not to care does not disconnect you from others. It connects you to yourself. It forces you to listen to your own emotions before expressing them. It makes you more conscious of what you give away. It transforms care from a reflex into a choice. When care becomes conscious, it becomes powerful. Most people mistake this form of care for emotional distance, but it is actually emotional clarity. You no longer love recklessly, you love deliberately. You no longer invest randomly, you invest selectively. You no longer chase understanding, you value peace. Pretending not to care becomes a ritual of preservation. You learn that in silence, your value multiplies. You stop trying to convince, and instead, you observe who comes closer when you no longer reach out. That is the ultimate test of connection. Who stays when you stop explaining yourself? True care, the kind that lasts, is not about constant expression. It's about presence even in absence. It's about quiet loyalty, unseen effort, and emotional discipline. When you master this form of care, you stop needing to prove it. You simply are it. And that subtle shift changes everything. People feel it in your energy, in your composure, in the way you no longer seek their validation. You become the calm in their chaos, the stability in their uncertainty. That's the paradox of pretending not to care. It creates a magnetism that those who chase approval will never understand. Because when you no longer need to be understood, you begin to be felt. Your silence becomes your language, your restraint becomes your presence, your indifference becomes your message. But deep inside, you still care. You just no longer let your care be used against you. You've learned that real strength is not the absence of feeling, it's the mastery of it. Pretending not to care is a reminder to yourself that your peace is worth more than your explanation. It's not cruelty, it's clarity. And those who misunderstand it are often those who benefit from your chaos. They preferred you emotional because emotion made you predictable. They preferred you expressive because expression made you readable. They preferred you caring out loud because it made them the center of your focus. When you withdraw that energy, they feel lost. They project blame. But you finally feel calm. You realize that pretending not to care was not an act of ego. It was an act of self-protection. Because the moment you stop needing to be seen, you start to see everything clearly. You begin to discern intention behind words, manipulation behind affection, ego behind apology. You see the hidden power games that were always there, masked by charm or sentiment. And now, because you care silently, you are no longer part of that game. You are the observer of it. You hold the advantage. You understand that power is never in expression. It is in control. And pretending not to care is control disguised as calm. It's the art of maintaining dignity in a world that constantly tries to make you react. The longer you practice it, the stronger you become. You'll start to notice how silence unsettles those who once manipulated your empathy. You'll see how calm confuses those who expected chaos. You'll watch how distance creates desire in those who once took your presence for granted. And slowly, you'll realize that pretending not to care was never about deceiving others. It was about teaching them how to treat you. It's a quiet declaration, my care is sacred, and not everyone is entitled to it. In that realization, you find peace. You find freedom. And you find power, the kind that whispers instead of shouts, that observes instead of reacts, that feels deeply but hides it behind the stillness of self-control. That is not indifference. That is evolution. Pretending not to care is not the absence of emotion. It's the presence of self-command. It's what happens when a person who has been burned by their own openness finally decides to guard the flame instead of letting it consume them. There's a quiet intelligence in that choice, a psychological recalibration. You start to see that most of the suffering you experienced came not from caring itself, but from caring without direction, without boundaries, without reciprocity. You gave energy to people who never intended to protect it. You shared your truth with ears that only wanted entertainment. You offered your loyalty to those who mistook it for weakness. And then, one day, after enough disappointment, something changes inside you. You stop giving the same access. You still care, but now you do it privately, silently, like a secret ritual between you and your own heart. To the outside world, it looks like detachment, but inside it's a quiet form of wisdom. Because real wisdom often looks like distance. The world misinterprets silence as apathy because it cannot comprehend restraint. But those who truly understand power know that restraint is not absence, it's presence under control. When you pretend not to care, you are not lying. You are reclaiming authorship over your emotional narrative. You are saying, I will no longer let the world define the meaning of my care. You start to realize how many people only value what they can provoke. If you react, they feel relevant. If you explain, they feel powerful. But when you stop reacting, when you stop justifying, something inside them collapses. Their illusion of control dissolves. That is why pretending not to care disturbs people. It removes their leverage. It forces them to confront their own emptiness. It reveals how dependent their sense of worth was on your reaction. You can feel this shift in subtle ways. Conversations become shorter. Invitations become fewer. People begin to sense that your attention is no longer something they can summon at will. And in that distance, a strange kind of respect is born. The same ones who once ignored your effort now find themselves analyzing your silence. They wonder why you don't reach out. They feel your absence as an invisible weight. This is the paradox of emotional power. You gain more influence by needing less. The less you reveal, the more people project. The less you chase, the more they pursue. The less you explain, the more they imagine. Human beings are drawn not to what is fully known, but to what remains mysterious. And pretending not to care amplifies that mystery. But to wield this power correctly, you must remain pure in intention. You do not pretend not to care as a weapon. You do it as a form of discipline. Because if you do it from bitterness, it becomes coldness. If you do it from fear, it becomes repression. But if you do it from awareness, it becomes balance. The difference lies in your inner motive. Detachment without understanding turns you into stone. Detachment with understanding turns you into steel. One is defensive, the other is deliberate. You must always remember that the goal is not to stop feeling, it is to stop bleeding for those who never intended to heal you. It is to give your care structure. When you begin to master this form of calm detachment, you notice the shift in your energy. You stop chasing closure. You stop needing explanations. You start letting silence do what words never could. You begin to trust time, observation, and human behavior to reveal everything that truth cannot hide. And you realize something powerful. People expose themselves in how they respond to your silence. The ones who genuinely value you will reach out with understanding. The ones who are using you will disappear. The test of absence reveals the truth of presence. That is why pretending not to care is not an act of pride. It's an act of clarity. It allows reality to show itself without interference. You begin to live in observation mode. You listen more, you talk less. You read tone, timing, and energy more than words. You learn that people's consistency matters more than their declarations. You become harder to fool, not because you've grown cynical, but because you now pay attention to what others overlook. That attention, that calm analysis, becomes your quiet advantage. Pretending not to care refines your focus. It eliminates noise. It creates a calm distance from which truth becomes obvious. You no longer get caught in emotional turbulence because you have become the stillness beneath the waves. You understand that caring openly is not always noble. It can also be naive. To love without awareness is to feed a system that may not deserve nourishment. So now, when you care, you do it consciously. You care with limits. You care with observation. You care with strategy. This is the highest form of emotional intelligence, when you know exactly how much of yourself to give and when to withdraw. The weak confuse this with manipulation. The wise recognize it as balance. The emotionally mature understand that restraint is not suppression, it's precision. Every time you pretend not to care, you are actually fine-tuning your own strength. You are training your emotions to follow your mind, not the other way around. You are teaching your heart to remain loyal to your peace, not to its longing. This is a form of power that doesn't announce itself, but it changes everything it touches. You start to notice that people treat you differently. Your silence makes them cautious. Your composure makes them careful. Your absence makes them curious. You are no longer the one reaching out for validation. You are the one others want to understand. That shift is not about superiority. It's about balance. For once, you are no longer overgiving. You are simply aligned with reality. You begin to see that pretending not to care is the middle point between emotional chaos and emotional emptiness. It's the equilibrium where you still feel deeply but you act selectively. You begin to navigate relationships with the detachment of a philosopher and the intuition of a strategist. You become aware that most human interactions are negotiations of power disguised as affection. Words like love, loyalty, or friendship are often used to extract something: attention, validation, security. But once you remove the emotional fog, you see how often care becomes currency. People trade feelings for benefits. They manipulate empathy for comfort. They exploit kindness for convenience. And this is why pretending not to care becomes essential. It protects your energy from being consumed by emotional parasites. It's not cynicism, it's conservation. Because energy, like trust, must be earned. When you begin to live this way, your inner world changes. You stop expecting others to understand you. You no longer crave acknowledgement for your effort. You become content with being unseen, knowing that truth does not need witnesses. You care in silence, but your silence carries weight. It's the kind of care that doesn't demand, doesn't perform, doesn't seek credit. It's the care that simply exists because it's part of who you are. But only those who look deeper will recognize it. That's why pretending not to care is also a test. It filters perception. The shallow will call it indifference. The wise will see it as strength. You start to attract people who are comfortable with calm energy, who respect distance, who understand quiet loyalty. The rest will fade away, because your new frequency no longer resonates with their noise. You'll see that emotional maturity is less about how loudly you care and more about how quietly you remain stable. This is the stage where your detachment becomes magnetic. People begin to feel safe around your calm, drawn to your silence, intrigued by your restraint. They sense that you're not easily impressed, not easily shaken, not easily moved, and that makes your attention priceless. You become the rare presence in a world addicted to reaction. Pretending not to care becomes a mirror through which others see their own instability. Those who crave constant validation will feel uneasy around you because your silence denies them emotional control. They cannot manipulate what does not respond. They cannot predict what does not react. They cannot dominate what does not reveal. And so you become unreadable and therefore powerful. But with this power comes responsibility. You must not use it to dominate, but to elevate. You must not turn silence into punishment, but into reflection. Pretending not to care is not about making others chase. It's about restoring your dignity, your balance, your emotional autonomy. You do not owe the world an explanation for your calm. You do not owe anyone your vulnerability unless it is met with respect. The beauty of this state is that you stop depending on outcomes. You care without expectation, love without attachment, and walk away without resentment. You become like water, present, adaptable, but never begging to be contained. You realize that caring silently allows you to give more, purely because it's no longer entangled with ego. It's no longer about being appreciated, it's about being authentic. You learn that the most powerful care is not expressed to be seen, it's lived to be felt. And in a world obsessed with performance, that kind of authenticity becomes revolutionary. It creates presence. It commands attention without seeking it. It radiates peace that cannot be faked. Pretending not to care is not the death of emotion. It is the rebirth of integrity. You are no longer a slave to impulses, no longer controlled by how others treat you. You have become your own anchor. Your silence, your restraint, your composure, these are your weapons of peace. You stop fighting to be understood and start focusing on understanding yourself. You discover that not caring outwardly does not mean you've stopped loving. It means you've started loving wisely. You've learned that true care does not demand recognition because it already knows its own depth. And perhaps that's what people fear most about your silence. It reflects a kind of inner power they haven't yet found. The truth is, pretending not to care is not pretending at all. It's simply a higher form of care, one that no longer needs validation to exist. There comes a point in emotional evolution when you understand that silence can be more loving than explanation, and distance can be more honest than closeness. Pretending not to care is not a betrayal of your nature. It is a refined expression of it. You stop pouring emotion into spaces where it evaporates. You stop chasing people who make you question your worth. You stop explaining feelings to those who only listen to respond. You begin to realize that the loudest demonstrations of care often come from the most insecure hearts, while the quietest ones come from the most grounded. To pretend not to care is to say, I no longer need to perform my emotions to prove that they are real. That realization feels like liberation wrapped in melancholy, because it comes with loss, the loss of your old self who believed that caring loudly would be enough to make people stay. You begin to grieve the version of you who used to overextend, over-explain, overfeel. But beneath that grief, something extraordinary happens. Clarity emerges. You see the patterns that used to blind you. You see how people often mistake availability for weakness, kindness for submission, vulnerability for dependency. And in that awareness, you find peace in pretending. The pretending is not a lie, it's a form of emotional strategy. It allows you to continue loving without losing yourself. It allows you to remain soft without being shattered. It allows you to stay kind without being naive. Pretending not to care becomes the bridge between compassion and self-respect. It's the point where you say, I still care, but I refuse to let my care control me. This is where you start to walk through life with quiet composure, like someone who has been through emotional wars and has learned that the strongest soldiers are not the ones who shout. They are the ones who stand still while others panic. You start to carry yourself differently. People feel the difference even before they understand it. Your silence gains a presence. Your eyes hold calm instead of desperation. You begin to give energy without attachment, attention without obsession, and presence without dependence. People sense that you are not easily swayed, not easily provoked. That calmness unnerves them, because most of society is built on emotional noise, on oversharing, overreacting, overstating. So when someone like you appears, someone who seems to care but doesn't cling, who feels but doesn't expose, it creates confusion. They can't categorize you. You no longer fit the emotional scripts that most people rely on. You have become unpredictable and therefore powerful. Pretending not to care in this sense becomes a shield and a mirror. It shields you from those who feed off reaction and reflects the truth of others back to them. You can see how people behave when your attention is no longer guaranteed. Some retreat, some chase, some reveal who they truly are. This is the silent filtering process that protects your peace. You begin to see that every act of pretending is not deception, it's discernment. It's your way of testing what deserves your truth. You have learned that truth, when given to the wrong person, becomes a weapon against you. So now you speak less, feel deeply, and reveal selectively. The irony is that by pretending not to care, you begin to care more authentically, because your care is now free from performance. It's no longer about proving, it's about preserving. You no longer act out of fear of losing people. You act from the calm understanding that what is meant to stay will recognize your silence, not demand your noise. In this way, pretending not to care purifies love itself. It removes the ego from affection. It removes desperation from connection. It removes control from compassion. You start to see that love without boundaries is not love. It's erosion. The more you give without structure, the more you lose shape. But when you master this art of calm indifference, love becomes centered again. It becomes peaceful, not chaotic. Present, not consuming. Mature, not dramatic. The more you practice it, the more your life transforms. You begin to handle conflict differently. You no longer fight for understanding. You no longer send long explanations. You no longer justify your silence. You simply observe. Observation becomes your new expression. You let time reveal what pressure used to distort. You start to feel a deep inner confidence that does not depend on reaction. This is emotional sovereignty, the ability to feel deeply while remaining unaffected by volatility. It's when you no longer chase closure because you've already closed the door internally. You no longer depend on apologies because you've already accepted the truth of behavior. You no longer seek validation because you've already validated yourself through experience. Pretending not to care becomes an act of quiet mastery. You are no longer trying to win anyone's approval. You are simply staying true to your own equilibrium. The silence that once felt like suppression now feels like sanctuary. It becomes the space where your emotions breathe without interference. You begin to understand that solitude is not loneliness. It is clarity without noise. You feel peace in being misunderstood because you know that those who matter will sense your intent beyond your expression. Those who misread your silence were never meant to understand you anyway. They were meant to teach you discernment. That's the hidden wisdom in pretending not to care. It reveals who was connecting to your soul and who was only attached to your attention. The ones who loved your presence but never valued your peace will fall away. The ones who understand that silence can also be care will stay. And when they stay, it feels different, it feels calm. There's no anxiety in the connection, no need to constantly prove loyalty, no fear of loss. You simply coexist in mutual understanding. That's the kind of connection your silence attracts, the kind built on energy, not expression. This form of emotional discipline doesn't make you unfeeling. It makes you untouchable by chaos. You begin to navigate life with a kind of composed intensity, present, observant, aware. You start to notice the subtle power shifts that happen when you stop reacting. People who once had emotional control over you start to lose it. They no longer know how to move you. They no longer know how to provoke a reaction. That confuses them, frustrates them, sometimes even fascinates them. And you simply stay calm. You begin to understand that peace itself is intimidating to those who thrive on conflict. Your silence becomes their mirror, showing them how loud their insecurities are. This is where the real depth of pretending not to care reveals itself. It's not about hiding emotion, it's about mastering energy. You start to manage your focus like a scarce resource. You don't engage with every emotional invitation. You don't respond to every stimulus. You choose your battles with surgical precision, and by doing so, you create an invisible aura of control that others can feel but cannot describe. You become the calm presence that unsettles the chaotic, the quiet that commands attention in a room full of noise, the person who doesn't need to prove power because it's already woven into their silence. This energy doesn't just affect relationships, it transforms your entire way of being. You stop rushing decisions, you stop fearing outcomes, you stop seeking shortcuts to peace, because you now understand that peace itself is a discipline. Pretending not to care becomes a daily practice of emotional strength. Not a momentary act. It's how you preserve your essence in a world designed to drain it. You start to realize that not everything deserves your care, and not everyone can handle it. So you give it where it's valued, and you protect it where it's not. That's not cold, it's wise. The longer you live this way, the more you respect the balance between empathy and detachment. You stop judging others for their noise because you've been there. You stop explaining your silence because those who feel your presence don't need an explanation. You begin to embody a rare kind of stability that feels like power to others, but feels like peace to you. Pretending not to care in its purest form is emotional self-defense wrapped in grace. It's the understanding that your peace is your most expensive possession, and not everyone can afford it. You no longer seek to be understood because you finally understand yourself. You no longer need to convince anyone of your intentions because your actions are aligned with your truth. You no longer crave emotional reciprocity because your fulfillment comes from your own self-mastery. You care silently, you love quietly, you protect peacefully. And in a world obsessed with noise that makes you unforgettable, at a certain point you begin to understand that pretending not to care is not suppression, it's refinement. It's not about hiding your emotions, it's about filtering where they flow. You no longer waste your rivers on barren soil. You start to see that care, in its raw form, is one of the most powerful energies in existence. But without boundaries, it becomes your downfall. It drains you, weakens you, exposes you. So you start to hold it back, not because you've stopped feeling, but because you finally understand the cost of feeling too freely. You learn to treat your emotions as a currency of depth, something to be spent with precision. Every time you pretend not to care, you are quietly asserting value. You're telling the world that your energy is not cheap, that your peace cannot be purchased by attention, that your love is no longer a product of impulse, but of awareness. That shift in psychology changes everything. You start to watch people's behavior instead of their words. You no longer get lost in promises. You analyze consistency. You no longer fall for charm. You observe patterns. You no longer rush to prove your loyalty. You wait to see if theirs can stand in silence. And slowly, the world around you begins to reorganize. Those who were drawn to your vulnerability fade away. Those who respect your strength remain. It's not an intentional purge. It's a natural consequence of elevation. Because pretending not to care is like raising the frequency of your emotional field, it filters out noise. The chaotic ones find you boring now. The grounded ones find you magnetic. The ones who sought validation through your attention now feel discomfort in your calm. The ones who understand depth sense your peace as familiarity. This process is silent but transformative. You start to realize that caring too loudly was never strength. It was dependency disguised as generosity. You wanted to be seen as good, loving, selfless. But now you understand that true goodness is quiet. It does not announce itself. It simply exists, unwavering even when unseen. You stop explaining your silence to those who mistake it for absence. You stop trying to fix those who prefer their chaos. You stop giving your empathy to those who weaponize it. This is the hidden strength behind pretending not to care. It's the ability to remain kind without being consumed. The world tries to confuse kindness with servitude. But when you master your emotions, your kindness becomes choice, not obligation. You can care and still say no. You can love and still leave. You can forgive and still protect yourself. This balance is what most people fear because it breaks their control. Your silence deprives them of predictable responses. Your detachment disrupts their emotional leverage. And this is why those who cannot manipulate you will always call you cold. They will say you've changed. They will accuse you of not caring anymore. But what they truly mean is that they can no longer use your care for comfort. They feel the absence of your emotional availability as loss. Not because they loved you deeply, but because they relied on your openness to feed their ego. When you stop providing that, they start to wither. And yet this is not vengeance, it's balance restoring itself. Pretending not to care becomes the invisible correction of emotional imbalance. You no longer overcompensate. You no longer play therapist to people who enjoy their pain. You no longer explain your boundaries to those committed to misunderstanding them. You simply exist in peace and let silence deliver your message. That kind of stillness is terrifying to those addicted to noise, because silence exposes what words conceal. It reveals who truly values you and who only valued access to you. You begin to see how people panic in the presence of someone who cannot be emotionally provoked. They start to project, to accuse, to dramatize, anything to break your calm, but your stillness remains. You have learned that not reacting is not weakness, it is mastery. You have discovered that the strongest form of care is to let people face the consequences of how they treat you. You no longer rush to rescue. You no longer soften every discomfort. You no longer dilute your truth to be more palatable. You understand now that pain is a teacher, and protecting people from their lessons only delays their growth. So you allow space. You allow absence. You allow silence to work where words once failed. That is how pretending not to care becomes an act of compassion, not for them, but for yourself. It gives you back the emotional energy you once scattered across people and situations that could not hold it. You begin to reinvest that energy inward. You start to rebuild the inner world that neglect had worn down. You rediscover interests, purpose, calm. You learn to sit in your own company without the need to fill the void with validation. Your solitude transforms from loneliness into sovereignty. The more you master this, the more you realize that pretending not to care was never pretense. It was preparation. It was training for a life where peace is not conditional. It's the armor you wear in a world where emotions are exploited as currency. It allows you to love without losing, to give without depleting, to connect without collapsing. That is emotional self-sufficiency, the rarest form of power. But this power has a cost: isolation. You begin to notice that few can meet you at this level of calm. Most people crave intensity, drama, validation loops. They don't know how to exist in the stillness you now embody, and so they drift away. You might feel the sting of solitude, but beneath it lies something richer: peace. You start to realize that peace is not the absence of people, it's the absence of emotional chaos. You learn that being misunderstood is not failure, it's freedom. Because those who misunderstand your silence are not meant to hear your truth. They are not ready for it. The ones who are will feel it, even without words. That's the hidden beauty of restraint. It attracts alignment. The world starts to mirror your internal order. You attract people who speak less and mean more, who listen deeply, who respect space. You draw in situations that require calm, not chaos. You find yourself at peace not because life got easier, but because your response did. Pretending not to care reshapes your relationship with reality. You no longer interpret rejection as loss. You see it as direction. You no longer chase closure, you create it internally. You no longer see silence as emptiness. You see it as evidence of control. You understand that not every connection deserves expression, and not every feeling requires reaction. You've become emotionally minimalist, removing the unnecessary to preserve the essential. That simplicity radiates power. People begin to feel it in your presence. You say less, but your words carry more weight. You reveal less, but your absence carries more meaning. You care less visibly, but your energy feels more real. Because now your care comes from awareness, not from impulse. It is no longer noisy, it is deliberate. And deliberate care is the rarest kind. It's what makes people remember you long after you've gone silent. They replay conversations. They feel your composure as a lingering echo. They realize that what they once called indifference was actually integrity. Because you never stopped caring. You just stopped performing it. That is the quiet revolution within pretending not to care. It redefines what love looks like when stripped of need. It is no longer desperate, it is dignified. It no longer grasps, it guards. It no longer pleads, it preserves. And when you live in that state, you realize that you were never pretending, you were protecting. Protecting your peace, your value, your time, your depth. You start to look at the world differently. You no longer envy those who express endlessly. You feel compassion for them. You know the weight of that exhaustion. You no longer measure love by how loud it is. You measure it by how still it feels. You no longer chase attention, you embody presence. That shift cannot be faked. It radiates through your energy, through the way you move, through the silence that now surrounds your every decision. You've evolved from emotional noise to emotional signal. You've learned that pretending not to care was the bridge between chaos and clarity. And now you live on the other side. There is a moment when pretending not to care stops being a conscious effort and becomes your natural state. You no longer calculate your silences, they flow effortlessly. You no longer restrain your emotions out of fear. You simply understand that not every emotion deserves release. You move differently now. You speak less, yet when you do, people listen. You observe more, and in your observation, you begin to see what most people are blind to: the quiet mechanics of power in human behavior. You notice how people reveal their weakness through constant validation seeking, how they mistake loudness for confidence, how they equate reaction with relevance. You stand apart from that, not in superiority, but in stillness. Because you've learned that silence is not emptiness, it's focus. Pretending not to care was your training ground. Now it has become your nature. You are no longer trying to prove emotional control. You live it. And those who encounter you can feel it, even if they can't name it. You've become someone who is both present and elusive, grounded yet mysterious. People feel drawn to your composure because it represents what they subconsciously crave: peace. But what they often don't realize is that your peace was not inherited. It was earned. It came from heartbreaks that forced you to withdraw, from disappointments that sharpened your discernment, from countless moments where you cared too much and were met with indifference. Every wound became a lesson in restraint. Every silence you chose became a declaration of sovereignty. And now you carry that mastery with quiet grace. Pretending not to care has evolved into caring correctly, deeply but privately, powerfully but quietly. You've learned that emotional control does not kill intimacy, it purifies it. The people who are meant for you will sense your care even in your stillness. They will feel your love not through performance, but through presence. Because care is not something you say anymore, it's something you embody. You can sit next to someone and say nothing, and they will feel safer than they ever did with someone who constantly declared affection. That's the difference between superficial warmth and grounded connection. You have stopped chasing emotional intensity and started valuing emotional stability. And in doing so, you've become magnetic in a way that chaos never could. Because people are drawn to what calms them, not to what mirrors their noise. Pretending not to care has made you the calm they seek, even when they don't understand why. But this power must be held with humility. The danger of mastery is arrogance, and arrogance turns control into cruelty. So you stay grounded. You remember that silence is not a weapon but a boundary. You remember that pretending not to care is not about winning, it's about preserving your integrity. You never use detachment to dominate others. You use it to protect your peace. That distinction separates the wise from the manipulative, because power, when untempered by awareness, becomes corruption. And that is the one thing your silence has taught you above all, that control without compassion is hollow. So even now, as you move through life with calm dominance, you remain compassionate beneath your restraint. You can listen without reacting. You can love without attachment. You can forgive without returning. That is the highest level of care. Care that does not demand, does not possess, does not perform. You understand that pretending not to care was never about others. It was always about you reclaiming emotional agency. It was the process of turning reaction into choice. Every person who ever misunderstood your silence contributed to it. Every goodbye, every ignored message, every disappointment, all of it forged your composure. And now that composure is your signature. It's what defines you in a world that worships noise. You've become a paradox, deeply feeling yet unreadable, connected yet untouchable. People sense that they cannot control your emotions, and that both attracts and intimidates them. Some will try to interpret your calm, to dissect it, to find cracks where they can enter. But what they'll find is reflection. Your silence mirrors them back to themselves. Those who are insecure will call you distant. Those who are balanced will call you peaceful. You've become a psychological mirror through which others reveal their level of maturity. And that is the essence of power, not in making others obey, but in making them confront themselves. You've reached a stage where silence communicates more than words ever could. You can say no without speaking. You can express disinterest with a glance. You can convey care without touch. That subtlety is the highest form of emotional sophistication. Pretending not to care was your path to this, the process of transforming impulse into intention. Now, you move with purpose in everything you do. You no longer react, you respond. You no longer rush, you pace. You no longer chase, you attract. And yet, beneath all this control, there remains something beautifully human, the quiet ache of someone who still feels everything, but refuses to let it dictate their peace. That is what most will never understand about you. They think your calm means you've stopped feeling. In truth, you feel more than ever. You've simply stopped broadcasting it. You've learned that real care doesn't need an audience. It's not something you prove, it's something you live. You care by being honest, you care by setting boundaries, you care by walking away when peace demands it, you care by staying silent when explanation would cheapen your truth. This is the form of care that looks like indifference to the untrained eye, but to those who see clearly, it's the purest love there is, love that respects the self while still honoring the other. You now understand that caring without boundaries is not love, it's attachment, and attachment is the root of suffering. Pretending not to care breaks that attachment. It doesn't kill emotion, it cleanses it. It removes the illusion that love must hurt, that empathy must cost peace. That connection must require self-abandonment. Once you taste the freedom that comes from this form of care, you never go back. You become allergic to emotional chaos, resistant to manipulation, immune to guilt. You begin to operate on a higher frequency, one where you no longer give to be seen, but give because it aligns with your integrity. You no longer love to be loved back, but because love is your nature. You no longer explain to be understood, because understanding yourself is enough. This shift changes your entire life. Relationships become simpler, choices become clearer, peace becomes consistent. You no longer wake up wondering who you are to someone else, because you already know who you are to yourself. Pretending not to care taught you that identity built on reaction is fragile, but identity built on restraint is eternal. You are no longer defined by what you feel, but by how you handle what you feel. And that, in essence, is emotional mastery. Not suppression, not denial, but dominance through awareness. When you reach this point, your silence is no longer just silence, it's communication, protection, energy. It tells the world that you will not be moved by noise, that you will not negotiate your peace, that you will not trade your self-respect for temporary validation. You have become untouchable, not because you don't care, but because you care correctly. The kind of care that no longer screams, the kind that whispers, "I know my value. I don't need to prove it. I don't need to show it. It's felt, not seen." That is what separates the powerful from the desperate. The powerful know that restraint is influence, that mystery is magnetism, that silence is strategy. And so, your pretending was never a disguise. It was a doorway. From chaos to clarity, from reaction to response, from emotional survival to emotional sovereignty. You walk through the world now with quiet power. People may misunderstand it, but that's irrelevant. You have nothing to prove. Those who feel your energy will understand. Those who don't are not meant to. You no longer waste time explaining peace to those who benefit from your noise. You simply live it. That is your message. That is your legacy. Pretending not to care was never the absence of love. It was love evolved. It was compassion with discipline. It was heart with armor. It was emotion guided by wisdom. It was care purified by experience. That is the truth that only silence can reveal. Because in the end, real power doesn't shout. It whispers. Pretending not to care isn't the absence of emotion. It's the evolution of it. The transformation of reactive feeling into conscious strength. It's the proof that you've stopped living to be understood and started living to be aligned. And in that silence, you find the deepest form of care, the kind that needs no words because its presence is felt. If this truth resonates, it's because you've already begun to awaken to your own power. Subscribe, not to follow, but to remember, because real power doesn't shout, it whispers.